Thank you for tuning in. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell, and this is the Minisode of the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. Amy came up with this idea, so I'm going to turn this over to her in a second. Have a background that supports or backs up your book. Amy, do you want to elaborate on this?
Yeah, because we're seeing this a lot more lately. And as you know, we've mentioned before, a lot of times I will be the first one to kind of start digging into an author's background, their book, things like that. When they first reach out to us, I try to check out their website, their social, if they have it, things like that. And we're getting a lot more authors coming to us because, you know, my explanation is that they've had some enlightened moments in 2020. We've all spent a lot of time indoors. A lot of people are getting back into that book project. A lot of people used it as a reason to make changes in their approach to life. And while we 100% support that in wanting to get that out there, and I think a lot of authors are very well intentioned that they do it because they want to make a difference or they want to share something they've learned, which makes a lot of sense. But, you know, publishing is, you know, news alert, publishing is very competitive. So if you want to release a book that kind of falls into the self-help, health, wellness, even, you know, business advice arena, you know, you need to, if you don't have a strong background in it, you know, professionally or otherwise, that really in a platform that supports this. So if I'm not going and finding things that you already have out there that show that you are 100% owning this topic, then you just need to be really prepared to jump in feet first and with a killer platform when you release that book, or be ready to learn and learn quickly and make the most out of that book release.
Yeah, I mean, and I've seen this over the years where an author, so I've had authors that have, that I've talked to said, I've lost 60 pounds and I want to write a book about dieting, or I met the man of my dreams and I want to write a book about dating. And I think that's great that you have that story and that you feel so passionately about it. But the problem with a lot of nonfiction topics is that you really do need to be an expert. If you're not an expert, it becomes kind of a memoir, for lack of a better term. So some years back, I had an author who, her father had a heart attack, and so she helped him get healthy by creating this plant-based protein, back when it was very, very, very new, diet plan. And she wrote a book about it. And I said to her, you know, I think this is great, but you really could use a voice, a credible industry voice, like a nutritionist or a doctor or something like that, just to even write the foreword, right? Get somebody to write the foreword. Sometimes it's that easy. Sometimes it's just, if you know, becoming the expert. She was very much the expert on the topic. She knew this back and forwards, but it was helpful to get her more media because she had another voice, a credible voice in the industry backing her up, if that makes sense.
Yes, I love that. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. So sometimes, so if you're sitting on something that is, and most of the authors that I've ever talked to about this, when I get on the phone with them, I say, you know, I like this topic about, you know, whatever, dating or dieting or something. I mention those just because they're ever changing and they're very robust. But really get yourself a foreword or get yourself a very strong, maybe added chapter by the doctor or the expert who can validate what you're saying, because otherwise it's going to be harder for you to get media attention for this book. And, you know, I know that you'll probably come back, you know, some of you may come back and say, well, this person doesn't seem like an expert and they're not an expert. Well, sometimes people do get lucky, right? But I mean, let's face it, but more often than not, right? More often than not, you're probably going to need to have that voice to lend some credibility to the book before it comes out. So that's one way. You could co-author the book, but most of those people, you know, if they're in the health and wellness, they're usually pretty busy. I mean, we're all busy, I get it, but they probably don't have time to co-write the book for you. But a foreword or an added chapter or something is, you know, pretty easy to do. And in her case, she actually had a nutritionist vet the book and give her thumbs up and said so in the foreword of the book. So it became And, you know, I got her on a bunch of radio shows. And she did really, really well with this book with no actual quote unquote school experience for her. But she, you know, she built up a platform that worked well for this topic.
I think that's so smart. And that's a really great way to kind of bridge that gap. And I love what you said immediately, Penny, and I can't help myself. That's how my brain works when you said, well, this person, you know, doesn't seem to have a background, like a fluke or an accident. But I bet in almost every situation where it seems like a fluke, they had some sort of brilliant entry into the market with their marketing and how they presented that.
Yeah.
That book, you know what I mean? So they made up for it in ways that were just brilliant in regards to how they presented it to the world, you know?
Right. And then, you know, be mindful of the fact that if you are going to write about a particular topic, whether it's money or anything that is, you know, mindfulness, which is a big topic right now, or yoga or whatever, you'd better have the chops to back it up. So not just, I mean, if you run your own yoga studio and you're writing a book about yoga, you probably don't need somebody to write a foreword for your book. But when you put yourself out there as the expert, it's important for you to be aware of trends in the industry, you know, because if you're going to be interviewed, you may be asked about that. So you really have to stay on your game. Even if you had somebody write a foreword for your book, don't just assume that that's going to be enough. You still have to get in there and do the work so you know your stuff.
Penny, I think that's great. I think I'm glad that we did this, because I do think that we are going to see this even more now that we're in 2021. And I think people are kind of shaking off 2020 and are really kind of reevaluating how they're living their lives in a lot of ways. So I think there is going to be a lot of really inspired books coming out this year. And I think I'm glad we touched on this, because it's an important aspect that people need to keep in mind to give their book the best chance when they do release it.
Yeah. And I like that you said that we're going to see a lot of inspired books and people shaking off 2020 and coming up with some really cool ideas, because we're looking forward to it. And as much as we put together these podcasts and say, don't do this, don't do that, I got to tell you, we see so many books that we absolutely love. And Amy and I get crazy excited about great books. So keep writing them, keep your nose to the grindstone, and if something has inspired you, by all means, put it on paper. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell, and this is the Minisode of the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. Bye-bye.